Can you pretend to be my husband tonight? The poor widow asked, not knowing he was a rich rancher. The rain came hard and steady that night, drumming on the sagging roof of Mrs. Crandall's boarding house. Water ran in thin rivulets down the dusty windows, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the wood like a hungry ghost. Inside, by the dim glow of a flickering oil lamp, Eliza Hart rocked her infant daughter, her shawl pulled tight around both of them. The baby whimpered weakly, her tiny fingers clutching at Eliza's worn dress. Eliza whispered softly, "Shoo, my little one. Mama's here. Just a little longer." Her voice cracked. She was exhausted, hungry and cold. Her husband Henry had been gone for almost a year, killed in a mining accident that left her with nothing but debts and a child to feed. The landlord had given her 3 days to pay the back rent. That was 4 days ago. She had nowhere left to go. Mrs. Crandall's voice broke through the storm. "Eliza Hart. There's a man at the door askin for a place to stay. Says he'll pay coin. Go fetch another log for the fire." Eliza rose wearily, careful not to wake her baby, and crossed the creaking floor. The smell of wet earth and horse drifted in as the door opened. A tall man stood there, rain streaming off his hat. He was broad-shouldered, with dark hair clinging damply to his forehead. His eyes, gray as a stormy sky, swept the room, taking in the thin wallpaper, the meager fire, and finally Eliza herself. He tipped his hat slightly. "Evenin', ma'am." His voice was deep, calm, steady. Mrs. Crandall crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Ain't got a bed for strays. Boarding house is full." The man shrugged easily. "Don't need a bed. Just a place by the fire'll do." Mrs. Crandall sniffed. "Fire's for paying guests." Eliza saw the way the man's jaw tightened slightly. He looked like a man who could argue if he wanted to, but didn't. Instead he nodded once. "Understood." He turned as if to leave, rain still pouring down outside. Something in Eliza's heart clenched. A decent man turned away into that storm. It didn't seem right. "Wait," she called, her voice small but firm. "You can stay. I'll share my fire." Mrs. Crandall shot her a warning look. "That's against my rules, Mrs. Hart." Eliza swallowed hard. "He won't bother anyone. Please. It's cruel to send a man out in this weather." The older woman muttered under her breath but finally waved her off. "Fine. But if he causes trouble, it's your neck." The man gave a small nod of thanks and stepped inside. He removed his hat and shook the rain from his coat. His presence filled the room, strong, quiet, commanding without even trying. Eliza motioned to the fire. "You can sit here." He crouched near the flames, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Much obliged." Eliza's baby whimpered again and he glanced toward her. "She hungry?" Eliza blushed slightly. "Always. But milk's been hard to come by lately." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wrapped bundle. "Jerky and bread. Ain't much, but you can have it." Eliza hesitated, torn between pride and gratitude. "I can't take your food." He gave a small smile. "Then I'll share it. Fair trade." For the first time in months Eliza smiled too. They ate quietly by the fire, the warmth seeping slowly back into their bones. But peace never lasted long in her world. The sound of heavy boots thudding on the porch made her heart seize. The door burst open and Mr. Avery, the landlord, stepped in. His slick hair gleamed with rain, and his sour expression made the air colder. "Mrs. Hart," he barked, "your rent's overdue. I told you yesterday was your last day." Eliza rose, clutching her child close. "Please, Mr. Avery, I just need more time." He sneered. "I've been patient. But pity don't pay bills. Pack your things. You're out by dawn." Before she could speak again, the stranger by the fire stood slowly. He was taller than Avery by a good head, and his calm voice carried authority that silenced the room. "She's not leaving." Avery scowled. "Who the hell are you?" The man took one step closer, his gray eyes hard as flint. "Her husband." Eliza froze. Her mouth went dry. Avery's face twisted. "Husband? She told me her man was dead." Caleb didn't flinch. "You must have heard wrong. Mr. and Mrs. Hart are just fine, and you'll get your rent by week's end." The storm outside cracked with lightning. For a long moment, the landlord looked between them, the baby, Eliza's stunned expression, and the quiet confidence of the man standing before him. Finally, Avery muttered, "1 week," and slammed the door behind him. Eliza stood trembling, her heart racing. Why did you do that?" The man turned back toward her, his eyes softer now. "You looked like you needed help." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I asked you to stay by the fire, not?" He tipped his hat with a faint, crooked smile. Guess I got carried away, Mrs. Hart. Her breath caught. Mrs. Hart. The name had never sounded so strange, or so safe. Thank you, she murmured. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind those gray eyes. You can call me Caleb, he said quietly. She nodded. Eliza. The baby stirred again, yawning softly as if the storm had finally calmed. Caleb smiled faintly, glancing toward the window. Looks like the worst of it's past, he said. Eliza followed his gaze. The rain was easing into a gentle drizzle, moonlight struggling through the clouds. But in her heart, something new had begun, a spark of warmth she hadn't felt since before Henry died. She didn't know this man's story, nor why he'd stepped in to protect her. But somehow, in that small, flickering light, Eliza felt, for the first time in a long while, like she wasn't alone. She had no way of knowing that Caleb Turner was no ordinary wanderer, but a rancher with land stretching farther than the eye could see, and that one small act of desperation would change both their lives forever. Morning came quiet and gray. A thin mist lingered over the town of Brook Hollow, softening the edges of the buildings and turning the dirt streets into streaks of mud. Inside the boarding house, Eliza stirred awake to the faint sound of boots on the porch and the smell of damp wood smoke. Caleb Turner was already up. He stood near the fire, sleeves rolled up, feeding logs into the flames. The pale light caught the sharp angles of his face, the kind of face made for work and weather, not for ease. Eliza blinked sleep from her eyes. Her baby, Clara, stirred against her chest, warm and soft. You were up early, she said quietly. Caleb turned, a faint smile touching his mouth. Didn't sleep much. The roof leaks in 5 places. I fixed 3. Eliza blinked. You fixed it? He shrugged, setting down a hammer she hadn't even seen him take up. Figured it's better than listening to it drip all night. Mrs. Crandall's voice cut through the air from the hall. Breakfast's on, Mrs. Hart. Oh, and your husband might want to pay up today. Eliza froze, heat rushing to her cheeks. Caleb only smirked, biting back a chuckle. When the landlady left, Eliza sighed. I can't believe she believes it. He lifted a brow. You asked me to pretend. I just did my part. Yes, but, she trailed off, her voice faltering. Now everyone thinks I'm married to you. He met her eyes, steady, unreadable. Would you rather they think you're alone, with a baby and no roof? Eliza looked away, embarrassed. No. I just didn't expect it to feel so real. Caleb didn't answer. He only reached for his hat, the shadow of a smile still at the corner of his mouth. They walked into town later that day. The muddy streets gleamed under a hesitant sun, and people paused to watch them. Eliza holding Clara, Caleb walking beside her, tall and quiet and protective in the way a husband might be. For months she'd been invisible or pitted. But now, with Caleb by her side, men tipped their hats and women smiled politely. Morning, Mrs. Turner, someone said. Eliza blinked. It's. Caleb's hand brushed hers lightly. Just let it be, he murmured. She felt her pulse jump. At the general store, Mr. Collins grinned wide. Well, if it ain't the new couple in town. Can I get you 2 anything? Caleb nodded. Flour, sugar, and a bit of milk for the baby. Eliza turned quickly. Caleb, I can't. He silenced her with a quiet look. I'll settle it. Mr. Collins leaned on the counter. You from around here, mister? You look familiar. Caleb smiled faintly. Just passing through. But when they left, the shopkeeper watched him go and muttered to his wife. That's Caleb Turner. Owns the Turner Ranch north of here. What's he doin' playin' house with a widow? That afternoon, Caleb chopped firewood behind the boarding house while Eliza mended torn linens on the porch. She couldn't stop glancing at him, at the rhythm of his movements, the quiet focus. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words felt like solid ground under her feet. Clara giggled when he waved at her with a wood chip, and the sound made Eliza's heart twist. Your daughter's got your eyes, Caleb said softly. Eliza smiled faintly. She had her father's smile. Caleb's hands stilled for a moment, and something shadowed his expression. You miss him? She nodded. Every day. But missing doesn't put food on the table. He looked up at her then, a kind of respect in his eyes that she wasn't used to seeing from anyone. You've done more alone than most folks could do with 10 helpers. Her cheeks warmed. You don't know me. He leaned on the axe handle. Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's been fighting the world and still hasn't given up. Their eyes met, the air thick with something neither could name. That evening, just as the sun sank behind the hills, a knock sounded at the door. Mr. Avery stood there again, smirking. Evenin', Mrs. Hart, or should I say Mrs. Turner? Heard your husband's been playing lumberjack today. Shame you still owe me. Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. You'll have your money by week's end. You got my word. Avery eyed him up and down. Your word? You don't look like a man who keeps one. Caleb's gaze went cold. You're welcome to find out how wrong you are. For a moment, tension hung in the air like the stillness before lightning. Then Avery muttered something under his breath and walked off. Eliza exhaled shakily. You didn't have to stand up for me again. Caleb turned toward her, his jaw softening. Yes, I did. A man don't walk away when someone tries to bully a woman with a child. She bit her lip, fighting tears. Why are you doing this, Caleb? You don't even know me. He hesitated. Maybe I see something in you I lost a long time ago. Her heart thudded painfully. What did you lose? He didn't answer. He only picked up the axe again, eyes on the dying light. Let's just say, someone worth pretending for. That night, when the baby fell asleep, Eliza sat by the fire again, staring into the flames. Caleb sat across from her, silent as always. I'll pay you back, she said softly. For the milk, the flour, all of it. He smiled faintly. Didn't know kindness came with receipts. Eliza met his gaze. I just don't like owing anyone. Then don't, he said. Call it even, for a place by the fire. Her throat tightened. You're a strange man, Caleb Turner. He chuckled softly. Been called worse. The fire crackled, the room warm and still. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the scent of wet pine in the air. For the first time in months, Eliza felt safe. Not because she believed his lie, but because she wanted to. And as Caleb watched her across the firelight, his heart whispered something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Maybe pretending isn't such a sin, when it feels this right. The week passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. By dawn, Brook Hollow already buzzed with talk. The widow who'd lived in debt and silence now walked through town with a tall man at her side, one who carried himself with quiet authority. Some said he was a drifter. Others swore they'd seen him ride fine horses worth more than most men's farms. Whatever he was, Eliza Hart, now called Mrs. Turner by half the town, no longer looked like a woman waiting for mercy. That morning, the little bell above the general store door jingled as Eliza stepped inside, her baby in her arms and Caleb behind her. The smell of flour, tobacco, and old pine boards filled the air. Mr. Collins, the storekeeper, leaned on the counter with a wide grin. Well, good mornin', Mrs. Turner. Heard you and your husband been settlin' in nicely. Eliza froze, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. Oh, Caleb interrupted smoothly, voice low and calm. We're managing fine, thank you. Collins's wife, Martha, peeked from behind a row of jars. She's got that glow, don't she? Marriage must be treating you well, dear. Eliza's blush deepened. I suppose so. Caleb hid a smile behind his hat brim as he paid for sugar, flour, and a spool of thread. But as they turned to leave, Mr. Collins squinted. Say, you sure look familiar, mister. You from around these parts? Caleb paused. Just riding through. Needed a place to rest a while. Collins nodded, but his gaze lingered, sharp and curious. Thought I'd seen you before. The moment the door shut behind them, Collins turned to his wife, lowering his voice. That's Caleb Turner, he whispered. Owns Turner Ranch up north, 2,000 acres of the finest grazing land in Dakota. Why's a man like that pretendin' to be married to a widow? Meanwhile, outside, Eliza adjusted the baby's blanket and tried to hide her nervousness. People are starting to talk, she murmured. Caleb's stride didn't slow. Let him. She looked up at him. It doesn't bother you? The lies? The stares. He gave her a small, knowing smile. I've learned not to give the town more power than it deserves. But it's not true, she said softly. I don't want to live in deceit. He glanced at her, eyes gentle but firm. You wanted protection for one night. I gave you that. But until your debts are settled and you've got your footing, I'll keep pretending. You got a better plan? Eliza's voice fell to a whisper. No. Then hold your head high, he said. They can't shame what you ain't ashamed of. His words stayed with her long after they reached the boarding house. That evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Caleb saddled his horse quietly out back. Eliza stepped onto the porch, cradling her sleepy child. You're leaving? She asked, her voice small. He nodded. Just for the night. I've got business outside town. Her heart tightened. Business. He hesitated, then met her eyes. I'll be back by morning. And then he was gone, swallowed by the gathering dark. The Turner Ranch sprawled across the northern plains like a kingdom of its own. Miles of fencing stretched across golden hills, and dozens of horses grazed under the setting sun. As Caleb rode through the open gate, his foreman, Hank Whitlow, approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Boss, I was startin' to think you'd gone and quit on us," Hank said with a grin. Caleb dismounted. "I had something that needed doing in town." "Something or someone?" Hank teased, raising a brow. Caleb shot him a look, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "A widow. She needed help." Hank's grin faded. "A widow?" Caleb nodded. "She was about to be thrown out. Had a child. No kin. I told her I'd stand in as her husband for a spell." Hank rubbed his jaw. "That's a dangerous spell, Caleb. You start pretendin' long enough, folks'll believe it. You might start believin' it too." Caleb turned toward the hills, his eyes distant. "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing." The foreman sighed. "You're still haunted, ain't ya? By what happened to Lila?" The name hit like a blow. Caleb's hands clenched on the reins. "Don't," he said quietly. Hank nodded, stepping back. "All right. But you know what folks will say if they find out you're playin' husband to a poor woman. They'll call it charity or worse." Caleb looked back toward the town lights glowing faintly in the distance. "Let him talk. It's not about me." Back in the boarding house, Eliza sat by the fire, rocking her daughter and staring at the empty chair where Caleb usually sat. She thought about his steady hands, the kindness behind his quietness, the way he'd looked at her not with pity but with respect. No man had ever looked at her that way, not even Henry, God rest his soul. But what if this Caleb wasn't who he said he was? Something about him didn't fit the story of a wandering drifter. His boots were too fine. His coat too well made. His hands bore calluses, yes, but not the kind from odd jobs. They were the hands of a man used to reins, not shovels. Her heart whispered what her mind refused to believe. He's hiding something. And as the baby slept, Eliza whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll find out who he really is." That night, as a cold wind swept through Brook Hollow, two hearts lay restless. One in a grand ranch house miles away, haunted by ghosts of a past love. And the other in a dim boarding house, wondering if she'd traded her soul for safety. By dawn, both would discover that the truth always has a way of finding its way through even the best-kept lies. The morning dawned sharp and cold. Frost glazed the windows of Mrs. Crandall's boarding house, and Eliza woke to the sound of horses' hooves clattering down the street. The baby stirred in her arms and Eliza kissed her forehead. "Just one more day," she whispered. "Then maybe we can move on, maybe we can stop pretending." But her voice trembled when she said it. Caleb had been leaving before sunrise every morning, returning only when the stars were high. He never said where he went, and Eliza, grateful yet curious, had stopped asking aloud. Still, the question lingered like smoke in her chest. That morning, when she rose to fetch water from the pump, she saw Mr. Collins, the storekeeper, standing by his wagon, talking to the postmaster. "I'm tellin' you it's him," Collins was saying. "That's Caleb Turner, sure as sunrise. Man owns the Turner Ranch north of here. Don't know why he's playin' the pauper in town, but that widow's got herself a mighty fine protector." The words hit her like a slap. She froze mid-step, her hand tightening on the bucket handle. Turner Ranch. The name rolled through her like thunder. He lied to me. The man who'd shared his food, his fire, his word, wasn't a wandering drifter at all. He was a wealthy rancher pretending to be poor. And she begged him for help like a fool. Her heart twisted with humiliation. Later that afternoon, she wrapped her shawl tightly and set out along the road north, following the direction she'd heard the men mention. The air smelled of sagebrush and cold earth, and her breath puffed in the wind as she walked. After nearly an hour, she saw it, the sprawling expanse of land stretching over rolling hills, dotted with cattle and fences. A wide white house stood at the heart of it, its porch lined with tall posts and rocking chairs. Eliza's steps slowed. The sight of it stole her breath. This wasn't the home of a drifter. It was the estate of a king. Two ranch hands looked up from their work as she approached. One of them, a burly man with kind eyes, tipped his hat. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Eliza's voice shook. "I'm looking for Caleb Turner." The man blinked. "You're standin' on his land, ma'am? He's just out back." She followed the sound of hammering to a corral where Caleb stood mending a fence. His coat was off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, his muscles flexing as he drove each nail home. He looked strong and unguarded, like a man in his natural world. When he turned and saw her, the hammer stilled midair. "Eliza," he said softly, surprise flickering across his face. What are you doing here? Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. I could ask you the same. He set down the hammer, wiping his hands on a rag. I was going to tell you. When? She snapped, her voice rising. When you'd finished playing the part of the poor wanderer. When I'd begged you for help one more time? Caleb's jaw tightened. That's not what this was. Wasn't it? She demanded. You let me think you were just another man down on his luck. You let me ask you to pretend, to stand beside me as if we were equals. But you knew I was begging for scraps while you live here. Her voice cracked on the last word, her cheeks flushed with shame. Caleb stepped closer, his tone soft but steady. I didn't lie to hurt you. I only wanted to help without making you feel small. I already feel small, she whispered. Do you know what people will say? That I threw myself at a rich man to save my skin. That I used my child to win your pity. His eyes darkened. You think I pity you? Don't you? No, his voice was low, fierce. I respect you. More than anyone I've met in years. You're the only one in this town who doesn't bow or beg. You fight even when you're down to your last breath. Tears burned her eyes. Then why didn't you trust me with the truth? Caleb looked away, jaw tightening. Because every time someone learns who I am, they stop seeing me. They see a name. A fortune. I just wanted to be a man again, for one night. Eliza's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him, but pride was a cruel thing. I can't stay here, she said finally. Not now. Not like this. She turned and began to walk back down the road. Caleb started after her, but she lifted a hand. Please. Don't follow. He stopped where he stood, the wind ruffling his hair. His voice broke as he called after her. Eliza, it wasn't a lie. Not all of it. But she didn't look back. That night, back in her small room at the boarding house, Eliza packed what little she owned into a worn satchel. The baby slept soundly, unaware of her mother's trembling hands. Mrs. Crandall watched from the doorway, frowning. You leavin', Mrs. Hart? Eliza swallowed hard. There's no reason for me to stay. Not anymore. The older woman pursed her lips. That fella looked at you like a man looks at the sun. You sure about this? Eliza blinked back tears. That man looked at me from a world I don't belong in. She tucked a blanket around the baby, whispering, We'll start over somewhere else. Somewhere nobody knows our names. But as she blew out the lamp, she couldn't forget the way Caleb's eyes had looked when he said, it wasn't a lie. Not all of it. Somewhere deep down, a voice she didn't want to hear whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd been telling the truth. The wind had changed by nightfall. It came howling down from the mountains, rattling the shutters and dragging the bitter scent of snow through the streets of Larkspur. Inside her small rented room, Eliza pressed her palm against her baby's forehead and felt the unmistakable burn of fever. Sweetheart, her voice broke as she whispered the child's name. Please no. The baby whimpered, her cheeks flushed and eyes glassy. She'd been restless all afternoon, but now her tiny chest shuddered with every breath. Panic clawed at Eliza's throat. Mrs. Crandall came at the sound of her cry. What is it? She's burning up, Eliza choked. She won't take milk, she won't sleep, what do I do? The older woman's expression softened with pity. There's the doctor down on Main, but he'll want payment before he comes. He always does. Eliza's heart sank. Every coin she had left sat in a worn pouch by the window, barely enough for bread and firewood. I'll work it off, she said quickly. He knows me. He'll help. But when she rushed to the doctor's office, clutching her shawl tight against the sleet, the door was locked and dark. The sign on the window read, Out of town until Tuesday. Tears blurred her vision. She stood in the empty street, the baby moaning softly in her arms, and for the first time in months, Eliza felt truly helpless. By the time she stumbled back to the boarding house, the fever had worsened. The baby's skin felt like fire, and her cries had grown weaker. Eliza fell to her knees beside the narrow bed. God, please, she whispered. I'll do anything, just don't take her too. The wind howled in reply. Then she remembered something Caleb had said days ago when they'd sat by the fire. I know my way around sickness too. Lost enough men and cattle to learn a few things. Her pride reared up instantly. She'd walked away from him. She'd sworn never to go back. But her child was dying. And pride couldn't hold a candle to a mother's love. Snow was falling thick by the time she reached the Turner Ranch. The lanterns along the porch glowed faint through the storm, and her skirts were soaked through by the time she reached the door. She could barely lift her hand to knock. It opened before she could. Caleb stood there, shirt half-buttoned, eyes widening in shock. Eliza. She swayed on her feet. Please, she gasped. She's burning up. I didn't know where else to go. He didn't hesitate. Come in, he said, his voice low but commanding. He took the baby from her trembling arms as gently as if she were glass. Get her near the fire. Inside, the big parlor was warm and dim, the scent of cedar smoke thick in the air. Caleb laid the baby on a blanket, touched her tiny forehead and frowned. She's bad off. When did it start? This afternoon. Eliza's hands were shaking. She stopped feeding then the fever came. He moved fast, fetching cool water, a clean cloth, a bottle from a cabinet. This is willow bark, he explained. It helps bring the fever down. I used it on my men during the cholera wave. Eliza watched him work, her heart pounding as he cooled the baby's head and shoulders with the damp cloth. His big hands were sure, steady, tender in a way that made her throat ache. Hours passed in fragments of whispered prayers and shallow breaths. Eliza sat by the fire, holding her baby's hand, while Caleb stoked the coals and kept the cloths cool. When the first hint of dawn crept through the curtains, the baby's breathing eased. Her fever broke. Eliza let out a sob of relief. She's sleeping, she whispered. She's really sleeping. Caleb smiled faintly. Tough little thing. Takes after her mother. Eliza looked at him through a blur of tears. You saved her life. He shook his head. You did. You brought her here. She lowered her gaze. Only because I had no one else. Caleb sat across from her, the firelight flickering across his face. You'll never have to say that again, he said quietly. Not while I'm here. Something broke inside her then, a wall she'd built from pride and pain and shame. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Caleb rose slowly, knelt beside her, and took her trembling hands away from her face. Eliza, he said softly. I meant what I said that night. I didn't lie to you, not about what mattered. I may have more money than I let on, but the man who helped you on that road, who held your child in his arms, that was still me. She searched his eyes, saw the truth there, and whispered, I don't know how to trust that yet. He nodded. Then don't. Not yet. Just rest. Let me take care of you both for now. Her lip trembled. And what happens when the fever comes back, or when folks start talking again? He reached for her hand and said almost in a vow, then let them talk. Because from this night on, I'm done pretending not to care. The baby stirred, then sighed softly in her sleep. Eliza looked down at her daughter and then at the man beside her. The man she'd thought a drifter, then a liar, and now, something else entirely. Outside the storm had passed. But in her heart, something entirely new was beginning to stir. Something warm and terrifying and real. The Turner Ranch woke to sunlight breaking over snow-covered fields. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and glimmering. Inside the big house, Eliza stirred awake on a soft bed she didn't remember falling into. For the first time in days, the baby slept peacefully beside her, her cheeks rosy, her breathing steady. The scent of coffee and wood smoke filled the room. For a long moment, Eliza just watched her child sleep. Then she remembered whose house she was in, and her heart gave a nervous thud. She rose quietly, pulled her shawl tighter, and stepped out into the hallway. The place was larger than she'd imagined. Polished oak floors, framed paintings, the kind of home that whispered of years of wealth and careful hands. And then she saw him. Caleb Turner, standing by the wide window in his study, sunlight pouring across his shoulders. He looked freshly shaved, a bit weary, but when he turned and saw her, a smile touched his lips, a soft, knowing smile that made her chest ache. You're awake, he said. How's the little one? Sleeping thanks to you, she said quietly. I don't know how to. He shook his head. No thanks needed. You did what any mother would. You fought for her. Eliza lowered her gaze. I nearly lost her because of my pride. Caleb stepped closer. You came back. That's what matters. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle beyond the window. Finally, Eliza asked, Why did you help me, Caleb? Truly. He hesitated as if choosing his words carefully. Because I know what it feels like to be left with nothing. They sat at the kitchen table, mugs of steaming coffee between them. Caleb's tone was quiet, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window as he spoke. 10 years ago, I came back from the war with a wife and a dream of this ranch, he said. I thought I could build a life worth keeping. But sickness took her before the first harvest. Eliza's heart softened. I'm sorry. He nodded. After she passed, I buried myself in work, The ranch grew, the money came, but none of it meant a damn thing. The house stayed empty. The laughter left with her. He glanced at Eliza then, his voice dropping. And then one night, a widow in a worn shawl asked me to pretend to be her husband. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The confession hung between them, fragile and sincere. Eliza felt the sting of tears. I thought you were just being kind. I didn't know I was asking a man to reopen old wounds. He gave a faint smile. You didn't ask for my pity, Eliza. You gave me purpose again. She looked away, the warmth in her chest both comforting and frightening. I don't know if I can stay here. People will talk. They always do. Caleb's voice was steady. Let them. You've carried the weight of other people's judgment long enough. Stay because you want to, not because you have nowhere else. Her lips trembled. And what would I be to you if I stayed? Caleb leaned forward, his gaze locking on hers. You'd be exactly what you already are, the woman who walked into my life and made this house feel like home again. The baby stirred then, and Eliza rose quickly, grateful for the excuse to breathe. She went to the crib by the hearth, lifted the child into her arms and rocked her gently. Caleb watched from across the room, his eyes soft, filled with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. When Eliza finally turned back toward him, she saw that same warmth in his face, and it made her heart flutter with confusion. I don't know if I can trust myself to believe you, she admitted softly. He nodded. Then don't try to believe, just stay. Let time prove it. There was something in his tone, a quiet promise, a strength she could lean on. Eliza hesitated, then whispered, If I stay, I'll work for my keep. I can sew, cook, mend clothes. Caleb shook his head firmly. You'll rest. You've fought long enough. Let me do the fighting for a while. Her eyes glistened. You're too kind, Caleb. He smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just know what I've been given. That evening after supper, Eliza stood by the window watching the sun melt over the snow. Caleb came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. The baby slept in a cradle near the fire, her little breaths even and sweet. For the first time since her husband's death, Eliza felt something she'd thought was lost forever, peace. Caleb's voice broke the silence. Eliza, I meant it when I said I don't want you to go. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Her heart pounded. You don't know what you're asking. He smiled faintly. I think I do. Their eyes met in the golden light of the setting sun. And though neither of them spoke another word, the air between them was thick with something neither could deny. A love born not of convenience but of survival, honesty, and the fragile hope of second chances. Spring came early that year. The snows melted into silver streams that ran through the Turner Ranch, and the once frozen fields began to blush with green. The house no longer echoed with silence. Laughter now filled the halls, mostly the soft giggles of a baby learning to toddle and the quiet hum of a woman who'd learned to hope again. Eliza had stayed. At first, she told herself it was only until her daughter was stronger, until she'd earned enough to move on. But days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel less like a stranger's estate and more like the home she'd been missing all her life. She mended Caleb's shirts, tended the garden, read to his ranch hands on Sundays, and slowly the shadows beneath her eyes began to fade. And Caleb, he watched her in quiet wonder. He'd known wealth and loss but not peace. Not until her. The woman who'd once knocked on his door in the snow had somehow stitched herself into every corner of his life, and into his heart. One golden afternoon, Eliza stood by the corral, hanging laundry on a line while the breeze carried the scent of lilac. The baby played nearby, chasing a patch of sunlight. Caleb came riding in from the fields, his hat tipped low, his horse's mane glinting in the light. When he dismounted, she smiled. Back already? Couldn't stay away, he said, half grinning. Then, more softly, the place feels empty when you're not in it. Her cheeks warmed but she shook her head. You say that to all your workers? He leaned against the fence. Only the ones who stole my heart. Her breath caught. He said it so plainly, like it wasn't a confession but a truth that had long since settled in both their souls. Eliza, he said after a pause, his tone shifting, earnest now. You've been here nearly 3 months. You've kept this place running smoother than I ever did. The men respect you. The land's come alive again. She smiled faintly. It's your home, Caleb. I'm just... No, he interrupted gently. It's ours. It started as pretend, but nothing about what I feel for you has been pretend for a long time. Eliza froze, her hands stilling on the wash. Don't, she whispered. Don't say that unless you mean it. He took off his hat, stepped closer and said in that low, steady voice she'd come to trust, "I mean every word." That evening, he asked her to meet him by the big oak near the stream that bordered the ranch. The air was cool and sweet, the sky streaked pink and gold. Eliza arrived with her daughter in her arms, the child dozing against her shoulder. Caleb stood waiting, his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to show you something," he said. He led her to a patch of freshly turned earth. There, beneath the oak's wide shade, was a small wooden sign with carved letters that read, "Heart's Corner." Eliza blinked. "What is this?" He smiled. "The start of something new. You once told me you didn't belong anywhere. I'd like to change that." Her lips parted as he knelt, not in pretense, not in pity, but in reverence. "Eliza Hart," he said, voice low but full, "you came into my life asking me to pretend. But every moment since then has been the truest thing I've ever known. I don't want to act like your husband anymore, I want to be him. For real." Eliza's heart nearly stopped. She looked down at him, at the man who'd once seemed too proud, too distant, too far above her, and saw only love raw and simple. Tears blurred her vision. "Caleb, I don't have anything to give you but myself. A widow, a child, a past I can't erase." He stood, cupping her face gently. "That's all I've ever wanted. You and that little one are everything I never knew I was praying for." Her breath trembled. "You're sure?" He smiled softly. "I was sure the night you knocked on my door in the snow." The baby stirred and reached a tiny hand toward him. Caleb took it in his big, calloused fingers and kissed it gently. Eliza's tears fell then, hot and grateful, as she whispered, "Then yes, yes, Caleb Turner. I'll marry you." He exhaled a shaky laugh of relief and pulled her close, the three of them wrapped in the quiet hum of the evening and the scent of lilac drifting through the air. For a long moment neither spoke. There was no grand music, no crowd, just two hearts that had found each other again after too much sorrow. Weeks later, when the church bells rang across Larkspur, folks gathered in quiet amazement. The poor widow, who'd once begged a stranger to play her husband, now walked down the aisle toward the richest rancher in Wyoming, and the happiest man in the room. Caleb lifted her veil, brushed away her tears, and whispered against her lips, "No more pretending, Eliza." She smiled through her tears. Never again. And when their lips met, the town that once pitted her finally saw the truth. That love had never been about wealth or status or reputation. It was about two broken souls who'd found home in each other's arms.